Here we are again. Thank you very much for joining us for Topsy Turvy. Just to contextualise, so your previous 3 films before this had been going backwards. The one immediately before was Career Girls, the one before that was Secrets and Lies, and the one before that was Naked. To the untrained eye, there was nothing in your entire filmography or television work. The theatre work we could flag up a little bit, but really there was nothing to prepare an audience for that. Is that not the case?
It's a pretty legitimate assumption, and it's also true so far as the films are concerned. But we did a stage show in 1993 at Stratford East, which, unbeknownst to anybody else, I was discreetly testing out something because I had the notion of this film for quite a long time. And that was the show called It's a Great Big Shame, which you know about, which was, there is a famous music hall song sung by Gus Elin. It's a great big shame, etc. I won't sing it. Which, in fact, Gus Elin, who was a Victorian musical comedian, actually, there's film of him singing it in 1932 on a set. And what I did was to dramatise the song. I won't go into the details of that. And that was set, the first act was the dramatisation of the song, set in 1893 in Stratford East. And all the characters, all the working class characters, were inevitably white. And the second act was in the same house 100 years later in 1993, which is the year we were in which all the characters were black. And there is a connection between what happens in the horrible things that happen in the first act that manifest themselves in the second act. But all of that was to do with all sorts of things, except that somewhere along the line, I was discreetly seeing what would happen if, because I'd never done anything in period before, everything was always, the principle was to gather actors together and to work collaboratively and research and do stuff, but it was always contemporary. And so that was an experiment to see what would happen if you tried to do something Victorian.
And what did you discover?
That it was possible.
Aha!
And actually, the idea of this was on the go because we made that film, which was shown here a couple of weeks ago, which Jim Broadbent wrote, called A Sense of History. And I don't know if anybody of you saw it, but when we were shooting it in the cold winter of 1992, there was a shot, and he was just walking along and talking, and I suddenly thought, ping! Jim could play W.S. Gilbert, who was a tall man, and a few weeks later we'd been to look at a cut of this film, and we went back to my house, and I said to Jim, how do you feel about playing W.S. Gilbert in a film about Gilbert and Sullivan? Jim knew a bit of Gilbert and Sullivan because he'd been in The Sorcerer, actually, at drama school. And his reaction was, why are you making this silly joke? I said, no, I'm serious. And so for 7 years, he, every time because it took us 7 years to get it together because it needed some bigger backing than we normally would have. And he would check in with Simon Channing Williams, our late producer, and me on a regular basis when gigs were coming up to see where we were up to. And eventually it happened. So that's one aspect of it. But I'd sort of nurtured the notion of making this for quite a long time. Hands up, am I a Gilbert and Sullivan fan?
That's the missing question, isn't it? And so nobody would have known. Well, I'm sure a few people would have done, but nobody would have known. I mean, now are you not the president of both the Gilbert and Sullivan and the Gilbert Society and the Sullivan?
I am. That's as a result of making this film.
Yeah. But until then, the light had been kept under a bushel. Is that not the case?
And quite legitimately so. I mean, who wants to go around telling everybody you're a Gilbert and Sullivan fan? I just think you're an old queen, you know.
It's a very curious thing, isn't it? That the astonishment was very great, but quite a few of the reviewers realised that this was a Mike Leigh film.
Well, I think that's the thing. I mean, obviously, the real, apart from anything else, of course, one of the many parallel objectives with this operation was to subvert Mike Leigh films and also to subvert
costume
dramas, and I don't have to remind you of the last three scenes of this film, particularly the one with Gilbert and Kitty. I mean, we were saying, isn't it gorgeous? But
I suppose in the context of this series that we've been looking at, the first 7 films were concerned largely with families. The families gave the structure, conflicts within the family, and with Meantime we looked at, that's also true, but it's impossible to make kind of definite statements about your films because they are so complicated. They are full of both this and that and the other. But Meantime begins to look at a kind of alienated person, which is why I plonked it at the beginning of this season. Johnny in Naked is that. In fact, all of the characters in Naked have this problem, and they are outside of the family. We looked at Career Girls, which is a then and now kind of thing where the alienation takes place when we're younger. Here, I detect it in spades in Gilbert, and it's not just in Gilbert, in many of the others, in the Grossmith, Leonora, they and in the way that Jessie Bond treats her dresser, and those kind of things. So this is, in spite of all the differences, it continues your themes or themes that you've.
Yeah, I mean, and that really looks after it from my point of view. That kind of looks after itself. I mean, we say, okay, well, first of all, I mean, all of everything that I'm motivated to tell stories about is about what we do. I mean, people at work, and this is a film about people at work, is about the way we are, our vulnerabilities and our stress, all that. Now, the minute you say, okay, this may be a film about showbiz, but actually it's a film about, and this is something that all of us involved in making the film have spent our lives being part of. It's a very, very grueling human activity, entertaining other people. And the minute you start to look at, to create these characters in a real way, then they, present themselves, the human dilemmas, the human, just the tough thing of living presents itself naturally. And of course, actually, Grossmith was a junkie, and Leonora Brian was an alcoholic, etc., etc. And Gilbert was, difficult. And so
Yeah. And your kind of innate interest in the individual characters means that they live in a kind of perpetual today. It's not really a period film, except
I think that's right.
in the trappings. For them, it's now, and they live with all the conflicts and dilemmas as now. I think that is one of the reasons for its very unique, well, it's utterly unique quality as a period film.
And also, I mean, of course, it allowed all sorts of kind of crackpot indulgences, like the telephone. I mean, we made a discovery in our researches, which, any 19th century film you see with telephones is they're just chatting into them like it's modern technology. But they did have to shout, because the fact is, it was the message was going down a very, very feeble and thin wire, single wire across London. Of course they had to shout, and they did. But you never see that anyway. So those sort of things are fascinating. And also, I mean, the thing about the fountain pen, I mean, that stuff, it just is irresistible, basically.
One of the other things that I think one of the other threads in your work that it picks up is that the films that focus on family, well, the theatre, it is a gigantic family, and all the conflicts that you would expect and that you've laid out in a film like Secrets and Lies, it completely picks up with this, and that's with all the intimacy. The dressing room scenes are particularly powerful in that respect. Yeah. So it must be quite a lot of fun to put those together, I guess.
It was all fun, for the most part. Yeah.
For the I remember that
Gary, of course, was, as you know, Gary was the musical director on. He didn't compose the score, but you were the musical, and he was responsible. I ought to just say this, because he won't say it. I mean, he was responsible for all the music research, but mostly getting the actors to sing and play the way they do, basically.
Not that it was a difficult thing to do, because they were all stupendously talented.
Well, yeah, we also we shared the auditions. I mean, I auditioned actors to see if they could act, and then there were singing auditions, and they all had to come and sing at least one Gilbert and Sullivan song, which was apparently the people at Chappell's Music wondered why suddenly, having had all this Gilbert and Sullivan stuff sitting on shelves for years, why suddenly it all went at once. All the people kept coming in.
Yes, every actor in London was suddenly very knowledgeable about Gilbert and Sullivan. So that was very. But there was also, I remember, an actress flying in from America to audition.
Yes, she didn't get the gig.
And she didn't get it because her voice was too. Well, I don't know if she could act, actually. I wasn't privy to that audition.
To tell you the truth.
But the voice was incredibly heavy, and we ended up, I don't know, creating the company out of people who sounded like that.
Who could sing, but weren't operatic. Yeah.
Who didn't have any preconceptions about what they were going to sound like. So, I was going to ask you some questions, but I'm so full of nostalgia about it. It's quite difficult.
See if you can remember the questions.
No, okay. I know. Let me ask you something about the two agonists, Gilbert and Sullivan, and finding Allan Corduner, because I would imagine there were there was one person who could play the part.
Well, the truth of the matter is that, I mean, this is entirely anecdotal, but we knew who was going to play Gilbert. That was a given, as I've said. And we set about the thing. And Nina Gold, great casting director, we said, okay, who's going to play Sullivan? I said, well, one thing is absolutely definite. It must be an actor who is musical and can play the piano and do all that. There's no question about, And various names were floated, and one very famous actor had been suggested that he could play the piano, but I would rather have my eyeballs pulled out with a corkscrew than work with that particular actor. So he was out of the question. But she said there's only one actor that I can really think of that fits the bill and could actually look like and is the right age and everything, and that's Allan Corduner. Now, I didn't really know Allan Corduner. I sort of seen him, but I really didn't know him at all. She said the problem is he's in Titanic the musical on Broadway, playing the chief steward on the boat. So that he's out. So, to cut a long story short, she suddenly said, in his contract, he can take several days off. So he's going to come to London and see you. So he came to London and we got on fine. And I said, look, here's the thing. I've got to do a bit of an acting thing with you, part of the audition. And there isn't time to do that now, but it so happens that I was going to New York to do the press for Career Girl. So I went to New York and he was in the show. And I got somebody I knew lent me a rehearsal space with a piano. And he came in and he did the acting thing and he was great, a real character actor. And then I said, well, I gather you can play the piano. He said, sure. I said, what can he play? He said, well, what do you want me to play? I said, jazz. Jazz poured out of it. Mendelssohn, Beethoven, Mozart, music hall. He's an absolutely brilliant pianist. He didn't really know Sullivan's work, but I went to see him playing the chief steward, and I only take time out in this discussion to talk about going to see Titanic the musical, because this was a musical about one of the great disasters of the 20th century. And I loved it. What happens is, at the beginning, they all come on the quay at Liverpool and they're going, it's a great ship, it's a great... And at the end, the same people come on the thing and they say, it's a great ship, but the ghosts of the people that have killed walk amongst them. And the only other notable thing about the production is that at a certain point in the proceedings, the set does this. Anyway, he got the gig, and I had to go back to New York for something else a few months later, and he was still there, was still in it, and I went to see him in where he was staying, and he had Sullivan's music all over the place. He had a piano, because he always has a piano, and he was absorbing Sullivan's stuff, and that's that. So he was great.
I'd like to mention that also the music staff of the film, the people who work with Sullivan in the Savoy, there's Mrs. Russell on the piano who has that great question about asking the Japanese people whether they speak Italian, which is one of my great favourites. That's Mia Sotirio, who is a brilliant actor and composer. But we've got with us tonight Stefan Bednarczyk, who played Frank Sellier, Sullivan's number 2, and did the bulk of the conducting in all those scenes that you can see. So big round for Stefan, who's threatened to ask aggressive questions during the but yes, I'd like to talk about one shot in particular, because you've talked often about motivating the camera, and really you won't do anything unless it's there's a reason to move it, and I would say you use the word classical about your filming. This is the debut of a crane shot in your films. Is that true?
I'm not sure offhand that it is true.
I can't think of another one, but if there is, forgive me, but that's one of the most poetic and beautiful shots at the end.
Yes, I mean, you see, it's not See, I would not say that was. I would not say that is an unmotivated shot. And
It isn't.
Sure you're not saying that either.
No.
I mean, it's how you use the camera. It's a matter of what's happening on all sorts of levels. I mean, of course, yes. In that shot, the camera takes off of its own volition, and nothing that's happening in the action is moving in a way that the camera does. But it's the end of the film.
Exactly.
And the emotion of the song and the emotion of what we've been through and the coming to a conclusion simply does naturally. When we conceived that, and we didn't take more than a few seconds to know that it was the right thing to do. You know. I think it's horses for course. It's whatever you need to do, you know, and I think that's obviously the right thing to do at this conclusive moment.
Yeah, I mean, another...
Also, I mean, it is about, you know, you've seen her you've been right in on her, saying that Yum Yum's speech about being gorgeous, and obviously she's pissed. And you start in on her, and then you gradually reveal the orchestra and the whole theatre and the whole. So it's the whole world watching so all of that. Hate explaining things that we've just said.
It isn't an explanation. I think it's. I'm just thinking of the myriad students who will watch the recording of this afterwards. Baffled, but also another of my favourites, and you don't have to explain it, I just notice in passing, is the wonderful track towards the orchestra when they're rehearsing the Mikado overture for the first time, which is tremendously exhilarating. Yes, and other joys. Okay, I would like to invite you to ask Mike some questions, or your questions about Topsy Turvy. And Mike will come to you, not this mic, but the microphone. And any hands going up? Now, there's one. Oh, it's my friend George, I know that.
Yes, it's your friend George, Gary and Mike. Just wanted to say it's a fantastic film, and musically, I'm a composer myself, and musically it is a complete joy. Particularly because everything feels for all the world as if it is sung and played live on every shot. How true is that, is my question.
It is, pretty much. I mean, there's occasional bits of post-syncing.
Bit of playback here and there, but yeah.
But no, it's not. I mean, they play back. It's done to playback, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Sorry, I misunderstood. I misthought the answer to your question. No, that's right. The songs were recorded in a studio, and then it was done to playback. That's right.
It's very difficult to believe that, isn't it? And in fact, I was saying to Stefan before, I've got a friend called Stefan, so I was saying to Stefan earlier that it's a miracle to me how he managed to conduct these really subtle changes of tempo, but they are to playback, and he did it, and they all sang beautifully too.
But I think it's important that you first of all got everybody doing the singing. And I mean, for example, it was quite late in the day that I was able to sit down and make the decisions about exactly which numbers we would include. And there are a lot of practical and dramatic reasons for the decisions, because obviously, it's not you don't get very much of any of the operas, including the Mikado, really. So in fact, I mean, you got them. They could sing the entire score, couldn't they?
They could, and all the Gilbert and Sullivan that they would have been in before.
Yeah. They sang through everything previous, but they learnt. So it meant we had the choice of everything in the Mikado and the other two operas on tap, if we needed it. So it meant that when it was recorded, for playback. It was actually very, very organic and very, very thorough, which is why, and they were really into it, so that they could do it very precisely, actually.
But in the case of somebody like, in the case of Henderson's rendition of The Sun Whose Rays Are All Ablaze, it's by no means the way that it's usually sung in opera houses, which is normally much more rigid. So you directed her for the playback recording, and then again, and it still manages to somehow seem spontaneous.
Completely so, yes.
It's a real achievement. I absolutely agree.
Sorry, I gave you the wrong answer to start with.
But that's the correct answer.
No, but it was a very interesting answer, so thank you.
There's-
Very cheekily, I just want to piggyback one other very quick question
a
on the back
second
of it.
question, eh?
But it's a very simple answer. What is the piece of music that Sullivan plays on the piano after telling us early in the film that he wants to compose a grand opera?
Ooh.
What the piece of music he plays?
Yes, what does he play on
Which
the piano?
scene is that? Which one?
It must be about scene 2 or 3, I would have
He
said.
plays a piece of Weber, a Weber piano duet with his...
That's what you mean, isn't it? Yeah.
No, it's a solo he plays. I love the duet moment as well, but
Gosh, I
that's
can't
Weber.
remember
He
that.
plays
Are you
a
sure
duet
you-
with her, and that's a Weber. And he plays the Lost Chord, which she sings.
He plays one of her songs, Fanny Ronalds wrote songs,
Yeah.
and they play that.
When he comes back
accompanies
from
her.
Paris, you see she's standing up by the piano singing, and he's playing. That's a song that she wrote, isn't it? Yes, it is. Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
But there isn't a moment.
I don't think there is a moment,
where he
George.
plays the piano by himself.
Is there Stefan? I don't think there is. No,
There isn't.
No, I don't think.
Okay, I dreamed.
Maybe yes. Maybe we should have put that in. Yeah, there's one over there. There's a question over there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and thank you both for that film. It was an absolute joy. I feel I've seen a film about the Mikado and the Mikado itself. Just going back to the final scene, the final song, I just wonder what part of the process it was decided to finish with that beautiful song, beautifully sung by Shirley Henderson.
I think that was just part of my decision making in deciding on the structure of the film.
So it's an early decision, was it?
No.
No.
No, I did what I always do, which is we spent months and months, 6 months, I think, in the preparation with the characters and all that stuff, musical stuff and everything else. And then later in the day, I sat down and decided on the actual structure. But that's before we actually shot it, just before we started to shoot it. So it would be then that I made that decision. But that's a dramatic construction decision, you know.
And I'm going to be cheeky as well, and can I have another one?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anarchy.
Just going back to the inspiration for Topsy Turvy, when you came to choose to do a film about the Mikado, was it when you went to a Japanese exhibition in Knightsbridge?
No, that's a kind of ridiculous question, if you don't mind me saying so. No, not at all. The Japanese exhibition in 1884 was in Humphreys Hall, which is where it was on the site where now stands Imperial College, behind the Royal Albert Hall. No, I mean, that was simply part of the story, which I'd been reading about since about 1950.
And to realise it, you needed... Is it fair to say that to do a film this large, you needed to have had the successes of Naked and Secrets and Lies in purely financial terms?
There is no question that, but for Secrets and Lies, we would never have made this film. Because Secrets and Lies was the only film I've made which was commercially successful and very successful internationally. And that did make it possible to make this film. No question about that.
Good timing, then. There's a question here. Thanks for that, sir.
Can I do one at the back? No.
Oh, yes. Oh, hello.
Hello. After Gilbert's wonderful decision to reverse his decision and allow Timothy Spall to do the comic number, why did we not see it in front of an audience? I really wanted to.
But you'd already seen it.
Yeah, well, I thought you'd say that.
Yeah, you don't want to see it twice. I mean, in fact, you see the first line of it, and you were forgiven thinking, oh, fuck, we haven't listened to this again. Which is why then it cuts to Gilbert outside. He used to do that. He used to prowl around the Strand and off the Strand and, on those first nights. Here's a funny story. Those of you that recognise it will know that the old woman that assaults him and accosts him in the alleyway is the great Irish actress Breege Brennan. And I went with this film to the Dublin Film Festival, and we did a Q&A, and a guy said, well, you know, he said, why are we suddenly in Dublin at that point?
It's good that people are awake. Richard, can I take this question here? That's the one. Thank you.
Could you just explain your attraction to Gilbert and Sullivan and when it started, your involvement with Gilbert and Sullivan,
well, I mean,
and what you
I'm
draw?
going to put this in a context. I mean, I grew up going to the pictures a lot, going to the pantomime, going to the circus, seeing plays, seeing musicals. We always went to see the D'Oyly Cart every year, who did Gilbert and Sullivan's opera. Going to the news theatre, seeing the Mickey Mouse cartoons in the newsreels. All of that was the stuff that motivated me to want to make films and make theatre. So it's all part of that, really. And I mean, we used to go and see these shows and have the records in the house, and yeah.
So it's a very long-standing
thing.
It's still a bit of a leap, I suppose, given your known concerns in your work in general. It's still a bit of a leap to think I will make a film about it.
Well, that was the sort of wheeze, really. No, it was. You said, okay, let's do the most unlikely thing, But you've already identified how it's, in the end, it's still the one. It's still the right leap. Really.
Yes, no, that's absolutely true. More questions, more. Yes, there's one in the middle. Thank you.
Hi. Maybe this is not directly related to this specific movie, but I was wondering who are your inspirations, big directors and the films that you go back and you study and maybe use some of the bits and pieces that you find inspiration?
I can't say that I ever really use things that are in any way inspirations. I mean, as I just said a moment ago, I grew up in Manchester in the 40s and 50s, going to the pictures all the time, but I never saw a film that wasn't in English. I only saw Hollywood and British movies. And then I came to London in 1960 to be a student, and I discovered world cinema. And so there are a massive number of filmmakers of all shapes and sizes that have stimulated me, inspired me, and in some ways influenced me, but I never really, in a kind of direct way, tried to emulate a particular director or a particular style. I was going to say in an either conscious or unconscious way. I don't actually even think I do it in an unconscious way. I think the buzz of movies just gets into your DNA, but you don't necessarily regurgitate specific things.
Yeah, I having seen all your films now many times, I can't think of a single shot where I would think, oh, that comes from X or Y.
No, I think that's right. I don't think there is.
Yeah,
because it's an organic, personal thing.
You can point to certain, I wouldn't even call them influences, atmospheres, I would say, like Ozu is an obvious example.
Yeah.
But beyond that, And besides, influence doesn't really work like that.
No, I think
Does
that's
it?
right. I think that's right.
It's more to do with.
I mean, there are certain things. For any of you here at the beginning of this, when we showed Bleak Moments, I mean, there was a point when we were thinking about Bleak Moments, and when we sort of, and this is a long time ago, we sort of thought about Vermeer. But that's not to say that there's anything in Bleak Moments where we sort of looked at a Vermeer and tried to replicate. It's just part of a kind of a feeling about things. But beyond that, I can't really. There isn't an answer to your question.
Yeah, and if you curious, there is a quite well known British film that covers the entire life of Gilbert and Sullivan, an old fashioned biopic that's fairly toe curling, I have to say, but don't let me put you off. And you could watch that and then watch this as the BFI.
Well, I did. Well, at the BFI last year, when they had a retrospective of my films, they said, "Well, pick another 6 films that aren't by you that we can show as a sidebar." And so I chose some films that I threw in as well. This film, which is called The Story of Gilbert and Sullivan, with Robert Morley as Gilbert, and Peter Finch actually as D'Oyly Carte. And they showed it. We showed it as a double bill. They showed the 1953 version, and when we were preparing this, we had quite a few copies of the 1953 one kicking around, but it was more a point of an amusing point of reference. It did influence this film,
yes,
by default.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this film. I did put in my notes at the BFI. Finally, I put: is this film a reaction to that one? Yes, a tiny bit.
Yeah. So, yes. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, 2. Who's got the mic?
I've got the mic.
Hooray!
Sorry. I wanted to ask you about 1885ness, the 1885 reference in the film.
1895.
1885.
1885, yeah. It's interesting because what you said about costume drama and what you said about, I mean, it's this
What
thing.
is your question?
Well, really, it sort of doesn't. Bits of it don't feel very Victorian, and yet it kind of works in an odd way. It's like the thing about respectability, the thing about the guy not wanting to go on stage in the short thing and all that. That's kind of the Victorian respectability thing. But it's interesting how it seems it's got that kind of feels very present centered. And there's a comment you made about for the people in the film, it is the present. So there's that thing of how, I suppose, an audience looks at something and they sort of think, oh, this is set in the past, but it's not their past. So I don't know if that's a question or what I'm trying to get at.
It doesn't feel like a question.
Sorry.
See, I saw a film last week, week before last, in the London Film Festival, which is going on release. You can see it. A German film called Corsage, which is about the Australian Empress Elizabeth. And it's, on the face of it, an immaculate piece of film about the 19th century, except that it's full of deliberate anachronisms, like some modern glasses or clothes, odd things, odd references. Now, I hope that that's not what you're accusing this film of doing in any shape or form, because here we've been scrupulous in every aspect, including we went to great lengths over the language. I mean, we had sort of we even at one point had, you'll remember this, I think, we had etiquette sessions, because the etiquette amongst middle-class people about, who's saying things first or second or going through doors and all sorts of stuff was very, very elaborate. So we did all of that. And I mean, everything we did was in order to make it authentic and accurate. But I think what you're talking about, and it's quite a legitimate point to raise, is that to make it, to go to the lengths of making it, I mean, for example, we could have shot it in black and white. We could have shot it in film that would look more like it was filmed in 1885 or something. Not that there was film yet in 1885, but say how it would have looked in 1896, by which time film did happen. But in the end, it's about it being as real as a contemporary film in the moment, as you say, but with all the details accurate. It's a complicated thing. In the end, I'm disposed, unless you tell me this is wrong, to take what you're saying as more of a compliment than anything else, in that it lives in the moment. It has a freshness about now. Or are you saying that there was something unperiod about how it felt to you?
No, I mean, I think that things like, I mean, the things that strike me as very good are things like the way the you've got middle class characters who use a lot of French, which is sort of Henry James, that kind of.
Well, it's just they did,
They did. So there's and the way that I mean, I like the way that you've got Sullivan is talking in German and French, and as he's kind of bundled out, to go to actually go and conduct.
Yeah, he had a German and a German manservant and a Belgian maid.
Yeah, so all of that is fantastic. It shows that we tend to sort of play down all of that when we think about. We just think of the Victorians as sort of stuffy and kind of insular, and actually this is as kind of, as kind of cosmopolitan, if you like, as we are. It's just different cosmopolitan. And there's all of that, going on. But anyway, I've said too much. Sorry.
Not too much.
No, but it was a compliment. Yeah.
Thank you. The gentleman in the third row there has a comment.
Thank you so much for the person behind me for that lovely question, just because it follows on really nicely with what Mike says about etiquette. This is a very pointed question for Topsy Turvy, though it does kind of cross into like the other films of Mike and other collaborations. But for me personally, I love the temperature of the atmosphere of a lot of scenes, and I love in particular when Sullivan is in the brothel, and then there's that lovely bit of editing to then the Savoy and the hot weather there, and I think that's such a lovely bit of moment of form. And this is a points question for the both of you, just because, sorry, Gary, but it's just it's interesting. I would like to get your perspective on the way that, was there any kind of direction for Timothy Spall in like how he would perform like musically for the heat, and how to kind of have that sync up with the performance, and also how happy were you with the outcome of the editing in the editing room and how brilliantly it all looks together? And that's just my question. Sorry.
Well, I mean, the thing about the heat is, that was all that happens because it did happen. I mean, there was this desperate heat wave, and it did affect all the theatres and all of that. Once you're saying, well, there's a heat wave on, you take on board in the acting and everything that's going on that there's a heat wave on, and that becomes part of what motivates what's happening. So that's the short answer to that.
And the editing?
The editing, well, I mean, I am very involved with the editing. The editor is a great editor called Robin Sales, who I'd worked with a lot previously in the BBC. And as I've said before, as with all the people with whom one collaborates on a film, be it actors, cinematographer, designers, editors, composers, whoever, is, each of them is brings to it real talents in their own right as an artist and a contributor. but in the end, you share the thing, and I'm very involved in the decisions. And I mean, the editing style of this is very much how I would. I was going to say how I would want it to be, but it is like that because of that, because I'm the director, basically. So, I mean, if your question, as it sounded, is do I like the editing? The answer is yes.
It's sorry.
If I didn't, it would be different from how, blah, blah, blah.
Just to add on, sorry, it's also just the way throughout all your films, people are at work. I just think it's a fantastic scene of people, real people, at work, under the circumstances, giving it their absolute all. And I think both scenes carry that message and that theme very, very well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, my favourite in that respect is the Sorcerer excerpt, where you see backstage with the thunder sheet and the electricity for the teapot and all that stuff, which I really enjoy. Any more? Yes. Pass that microphone along.
Well, my question is, and I almost don't know the answer, I imagine that you went to a lot of research onto the set design and particularly the sets of Dolly Cart, of the productions, because I thought they were exquisite. They conjured up an atmosphere. They were incredibly historically accurate and really beautiful and really enhanced that. But as you said earlier, the story of the characters and came through so vividly that they sort of overbalanced that. It made it seem real, very real, and it wasn't just a historical pastiche.
Yes.
But I thought the details were amazing.
And the sets and costumes, and the staging, we researched all, and they are actually the sets are the sets. We made them, obviously, but they are the original designs that were, in those productions. And we got from the Enthoven collection in the Victoria and Albert Museum and from the British Library, we got the prompt copies from the Savoy of the actual productions that you see, so that the staging is pretty much Gilbert's staging. It just seemed no point in not doing that, because that's part of the wheeze of it, really. Little bits of refinement here and there, obviously, but it was all.
In truth, you've created something for the future, for future generations to really understand a lot about.
So put it near your mouth.
Sorry, that you've created something for future generations that is very historically accurate, which is very useful in terms of, the way the Dolly Cart worked, the company worked, and the productions that went on.
Yes, I suppose with the accuracy, that's true. I just want to thank you for that. I just wanted to add to the heat wave thing. Of course, the theatre scenes at Richmond Theatre where we shot those, that was in the middle of the heat wave, ironically.
Oh, God. Yeah. It was, there were this chorus in particular, in these padded Mikado costumes, in this heat wave, in the theatre with all these film lights. They got very, very pissed off, didn't they, actually, up on the stage of the game.
It was baking.
It was, okay, here's what happened in relation to the thing about the editing. You will see on quite a number of my previous films that have already been in this, at the end, there's a little logo we had designed with a pair of scissors and sprocket holes saying, edited on film, because we went through a whole phase of being very, very piously and rigidly insistent that we were not going to edit digitally, we were going to edit on film in the old-fashioned way, because that was better, we said. And gradually, the introduction of systems with names like Avid and Lightworks, those were the two systems, were being introduced into the cutting rooms, which meant that you would have put it all onto digital, and that's how you do it. In the middle of the heat wave, with these, particularly the actors playing the chorus and they were all individual actors, getting very, very pissed off indeed, and there was quite a lot of rumbling going on. And we were behind schedule, and it was very hot and very uncomfortable, and we had the guys on stage, we had the guys in the orchestra pit, and it was just very heavy going stuff, and we were in at the theatre at Richmond, and we were the location base was at the Twickenham Rugby Club club facility, and it was lunchtime, and the producer Simon and the editor Robin found me, and they said, "We need to talk to you." So I said, "What?" They said, "Let's just go behind this bus." I thought, "Fuck, what?" We go behind the bus, and they said, and Simon said, "Look, the thing is, for financial reasons, we'll be looking at it, and we're going to have to edit this digitally." And I said, "You know what? Given what's going on here at this moment, you could edit on a fucking sewing machine." I actually said that. Because, and we did. We edited it digitally, and it was fine, and it was a learning curve. But at that moment, editing it, let's get the bloody thing filmed,
Very good. Any more? I can't see. Yes, there's one. Oh, George wants one more. I don't know if I
Very
can allow it.
naughtily.
Go on then. Hurry up.
Was it a real eureka moment, Mike, when you discovered that The Punishment Fits the Crime nearly bit the dust after the last dress rehearsal for your structure and story of the film?
Was it? What do you mean? Was it a eureka?
Was it helpful dramaturgically, I suppose?
When you discovered that, which I
No,
assume is a historic fact.
It's a known fact that it's a known historical fact that was part of the fabric of this history. He did cut it after the dress rehearsal, and the chorus did go to him in a posse and talk him into putting it back. That actually happened. So
yes, it's a well-known Gilbert and Sullivan nerd event.
I mean, of course, the thing about bringing history to life in these films, and we've had the same experience with aspects of Mr. Turner and Peterloo, which you have yet to see here, is that, of course, yes, every book you read will tell you that the chorus went to him in a posse and made a fuss and he put it back. But nobody tells you who said what or where they were or anything, and so we had to explore that through improvisation and characters and all the rest of it and build a scene.
It's a beautiful, beautiful scene. And when you talk about the family of theatre, Gary, earlier, it's the perfect example of that family feeling coming to something actually constructive and good.
Actually, I should remark about the chorus that if you're into talent spotting, Mike's very good at it. And there's lots of very good people there. Monica Dolan, Ashley Jensen, Casey Ainsworth, Richard Coyle, doing these lovely small Julie Jupp, beautifully formed performances. And anyway, yes, you at the back there. We ought to be winding up now. So I'll let you be the last question.
Well, it's Stefan.
Oh,
I'm
it's
just going
you.
to answer one of your questions. I was just thinking about, I hadn't seen the film for about 8 years, I think, and I'm just thinking, what a good way to have spent 7 months of my life. It's a wonderful, it is a wonderful film. And I think one of the answer to your question of how I could conduct to playback is that it's what you've both been saying. We became a company. We did it organically. We rehearsed and researched everything so much. I don't know if you remember, Kevin, lovely, charismatic, lovely man, Kevin Kidd, was not confident about his singing. And the joy and the hugs we gave each other when he got A Wandering Minstrel for the first time, it was like a theatre company. So by the time, and also I had already MD'd 2 stage musicals that Carl had written, so we knew each other. We worked together very closely, as you say, doing all the repertoire up to the Mikado. So by the time we'd done the recording, yes, I could have a quick listen before we did a take, but it felt like it was ours. It was owned by the people who were doing it, which is why I think as has been said, it does look as though it is spontaneous and in the moment. It wasn't necessarily the same moment, but it had been our moment, and we could reproduce it.
Great.
And I'm very proud of what I've seen tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan.
Bless you. To just echo that, the great stage rehearsal scene where the Japanese company, the three women and the guy come to watch the rehearsal. I was there for that, well, as indeed you were. It's unbelievable that I mean, it was done in a day, wasn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, the scene where they
rehearse.
They do the three little maids, and they. I mean, we had shot for 5 weeks in the Richmond Theatre, and by an absolute fluke, because we knew we had to be in a theatre, and by a fluke, the 5 weeks that we knew we had to shoot that material, that theatre was dark, was available. There was no other show there, but finally we got to the end of that, the final Saturday, and we had to get out that day because there was a real show coming in the next day, whatever it was. And we hadn't shot any of the backstage stuff. That was all shot later and on sets in another place. So we'd only shot the stuff in the theatre, and we had to shoot that on the stage. And so what you're talking about, I had to get it together very quickly. Now, I think there's a quality in that scene. I've always thought, and I've said this many times, there's a quality in that scene that derives from the pressure on us to make it happen. You know, there was no time to procrastinate about, you know, looking at it from... It was very, very direct. That way, this way, and that way. And it's quite rough-edged, actually. And I think there's it benefits from the fact that we just had to get it together and get out because there was no going over or anything.
And although the shots, the reverse angle and all that kind of thing it's quite simple, the staging is very complicated. The dialogue, the pickups, they're all phenomenally complex, all done on the day.
Yeah, we improvised and fixed the dialogue and shot it all on that day. Yeah.
And you can only do that when you've had 7 months of prep.
Everybody was really in it, you know. Yeah.
That's the only way you can do it. And it completely changed my life. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, you can't say fairer than that. Before we go, we'd just like to sing you a couple of songs.